IPMNation.com.
Living in a city when you're in it, watch the people walk by. And if you listen real close, you can hear them talk about their lives. And some hate it, some love it, some are thought, some are just tired. These are the people in the neighborhood, they just trying to make it out right. See, she never wanna be a New Yorker.
Good morning, afternoon, or evening, everybody, depending on what time you're listening to this show. This is Dr. John Rich, and you have tuned in to Dr. John's Neighborhood. I'm excited about my guest today. There's my coffee maker going off in the background. The guest that's going to be appearing about halfway through the show is Dr. Sharon Freeman. She's a colleague of mine in the area of evaluation. So what's evaluation? Evaluation is companies or government entities will hire evaluators to try to determine whether or not they're achieving their goals, where their strengths and weaknesses are, how they might fine-tune their operations in order to be able to come closer to achieving the goals that they have. Or sometimes they'll bring you in if they're having some kind of problem, a personnel problem, or an issue with some of their grant funding or something like that. So the reason that I wanted her to come on is because, first of all, she is a highly driven person. You're going to hear some stories of hers that are basically about how she overcame a lot of obstacles in her life. And I think that there's a lot for us to learn from her story. In fact, a little bit of her story is similar to mine. I grew up in an economically poor household and didn't have a lot of hope for the future, quite honestly. And then there was an event that I talked about in a former show where I was taking a college class and we were supposed to analyze a stock. It was a business class. So we had to pick a company and we had to find a stock and we had to track it across the semester and write a paper about when were they formed and, where were they going. We had to make some kind of prognostication about what we thought was going to happen with the stock. And I became convinced as a result of that study that the stock was going to go up. I foresaw a merger in the future, and I went to my father and said, I'm thinking about investing a little bit of money into this company. My father talked me out of it, said that stocks were only for rich people. Poor people like us were never going to make anything of ourselves, that we should stay away from that. It's too risky. And I listened to him. He's my father. I figured, he's giving me advice. He's trying to help me out. I'm not going to disrespect him and go against his advice. And yet then within a short period of time, I forget how long, the stock went up, I think 3 or 4 times what it had been worth. I could have made some good money there. And that was kind of an aha moment for me. I learned 2 things from that experience. One was that I was committed to not being poor when I got older. I think up until that point, I just assumed that I was going to be just like my parents. I certainly wasn't living a life that was trying to do anything better than where I had come from. It was just the assumption that I had that life was going to continue the way it currently was. But at that point, I decided I need to figure out how not to be poor, and I was going to have to do a lot of work because of the second thing that I learned, and that is that my father was not the person to go to for financial advice. I think that is pretty obvious now. I know that seems disrespectful to my father. My father certainly has done plenty of things for me, and I'm grateful for the impact that he's had on my life in other areas, but in terms of finances, it occurred to me that asking a poor person for advice about how to handle your money would be like asking a person who can't keep a relationship how to handle a problem that you might be having with your spouse. So I decided that I was going to pursue my own money goals. I wanted to make sure that my children didn't grow up poor because, quite frankly, poverty sucks. I've talked about that on my website plenty of times. But I wasn't quite sure how to do it. I knew that if I went to college, I could get a job, so that seemed like an important thing to focus in on. My college grades at the point where I had that business class were okay. I was getting B's. But I decided at that point that I really needed to prioritize my schooling because that was going to be one area where I could move myself in the direction of making enough money to be comfortable. Then the other thing that I did is I put myself in situations where I would be around people who had money. So I went to a church that it wasn't wealthy, but there were people at the church who had money, and if I kept going to that church, that I would be able to strike up conversations with people and get advice from people who had money. So it seemed like a smart thing to do. And so Dr. Freeman is going to talk about having a similar approach to her life. That she says late in the interview that she feels like, to a large degree, the elements of our lives are just equations to her. You decide on the outcome. So you remember in math, right? Like x plus y equals some number. So whatever appears after the equal sign is the goal that you might have for your life. It could be a financial goal or a relationship goal. It could be a goal for your children. It could be a goal for achieving some kind of dream. And so in the equation, that goes after the equal sign. Well, what comes before the equal sign? I think that the analogy that I just gave you is a good one. At the moment that you decide that you're going to try to learn how to accomplish that outcome, your equation might literally be x plus y plus z plus w, meaning that you know that there are certain things that need to be done to achieve the outcome, but you're not quite sure what they are. So how do you achieve the outcome if you don't even know what goes into achieving that outcome? Well, according to Dr. Freeman, and this makes a lot of sense, and you need to put time into studying people who have accomplished that goal, and then mimic what they did. If you find out that a person who made financial success invested in a certain kind of way, you might want to mimic their investment strategy. If you decide that you want to approach your relationship with your partner in a different way than what was modeled for you when you were younger, and you're not quite sure how to go about doing it, then find some people who are good parents and watch how they interact with their children. I didn't really have my father available to me to teach me what a good father looked like. In my case, when I decided that I was going to go about learning what a good father did, I did some research, because that's one of the things that I do. I read research. And I paid attention to people who I considered to be good fatherly role models. There's one I'll give a shout out to right now whose name is Tom Weimer. When we moved to Dover, I remember that my one son wanted to play across the street with a bunch of kids, and I was a little bit nervous about him playing over there when I wouldn't be able to see him. And I wasn't quite sure what to do. Should I take him over there and hover over him like a helicopter parent? Should I tell him that he can't because it might not be safe? Or should I let him do it? And so what did I do? If you ask Tom Weimer, not that you know him, but if you ask him, he'll tell you that one day he got a phone call from me, and I said, listen, I've got a fatherly dilemma here, and I decided that I was going to call somebody that I consider to be a good father, and I thought of you. That's, I'm sure now that I think about it, if someone were to call me and say, hey, give me some advice on how to be a good father, I think that would feel pretty good. And I guess there's a part of me that was trying to make him feel good, but primarily what I was doing is trying to get advice from somebody who seemed to have a better handle on fathering than I did, at least in relation to this specific situation. So, Dr. Freeman is going to come on toward the second half of the show, and she's going to be talking about her own life and some of the obstacles that she had and some of the dreams that she had, some of the goals she had for her life. The primary goal that she is still working on is that she wants to be an international traveler. She wants to travel to other countries and be exposed to different cultures, and she wants to work with other countries and be cosmopolitan. And I don't know how many countries she's gone to, but she's been to many, many countries. She's still always posting things on her Facebook page about places that she's been. It seems like she really likes to go to Greece. Incidentally, Greece is on my bucket list. I'd like to go to Greece sometime soon. I'm hoping to work that out in the next couple of years. So this whole conversation reminds me of something that I just recently saw on Netflix. I was watching a Netflix documentary about a guy named Tony Robbins. And I'm not trying to put myself out here as, the hugest fan of Tony Robbins, because I don't really know that much about him except what I saw on the video. And I don't want anybody to think that I'm advocating for him or advertising for him. I'm not making any money for talking about Tony Robbins. This is just me talking about something that appealed to me in one of the things that he said. And that thing that he said was that to a certain degree, life is about what we have tolerated. Let me say that again. Our life is about what we have tolerated up until this point. Maybe you're in a bad relationship and you've tolerated the bad relationship. And in the back of your mind, you know that the relationship isn't any good for you. Perhaps it's abusive. Perhaps it's codependent. Perhaps there are lots of reasons that you wish you could leave, but you can't find the courage. And so you tolerate day after day the kinds of things in that relationship that make you unhappy, hoping that maybe it turns around, or trying to focus on the few good things that can help overshadow some of those bad experiences. Maybe what you tolerate is a certain person in your life who doesn't treat you very well. I know that somebody in my life has recently had a run-in with somebody else, and this person is not very nice to my wife. And my wife is quite upset about it, because who wouldn't be? And it's up to her as a grown woman, and not the child that exists in all of our minds. It's up to her to figure out how to address that, because it's not acceptable for people to treat you poorly. If someone talks down to you, you have the right to say, "Why are you talking down to me?" If someone is insulting you or bullying you, you have the right to say stop and to take matters into your own hands. I wish back in the 80s when I was being bullied that I knew that I had rights, as nobody was talking about bullying at that point. I would get bullied and I felt like I had no recourse. Now I know that the reason that we have to stop kids from bullying other kids is because when they get older, if they try that shit, they're going to get fired or arrested. There's things that happen in a school environment among kids who don't have the emotional regulation skills to be able to control their anger and frustration that are just not acceptable out in the real world. And so as a lesson toward professional development, kids who are bullying other kids need to have some consequences and be taught some lessons, and also be given strategies for expressing their emotions in more socially appropriate ways. If I had known back then that I had the right to do something about the people who were bullying me, especially one person who's had the gall recently to try to friend me on Facebook. I'm not sure why I would accept that friend request. And I'm not sure whether he has amnesia about how he treated me, or whether he's hoping that I'll friend him as some kind of implicit act of forgiveness on my part. My own opinion about forgiveness is that forgiveness ought to be offered to people who provide a sincere apology, but not to people who haven't acknowledged any of the role that they've had in the suffering that they've caused you. So if I had known back then what I would be able to do, then when this person laid his hands on me, I would have taken him to court, called the cops. Instead, I went to teachers, and teachers told me that I needed to be tougher. And I probably did need to be tougher. But that kid, who knows what he's like as a man? And perhaps he'd be a different and kinder man if he had found out that bullying people and making them feel small and acting in physically aggressive ways toward them is not going to lead to a good outcome later in life. So, what do you tolerate in your life? Are you in a bad relationship and you're tolerating it? Do you have a connection with a person who doesn't treat you well and you've been tolerating that? Are you in a job that you hate? Do you wake up in the morning and count how many days until the next vacation? Do you have to drag yourself out of bed because you hate going there? Are you in a financial situation that makes you unhappy? Maybe you have a life goal. I think that all of us, if we go back to the time that we were in high school and the early 20s, the years in our early 20s, we had some idealistic and altruistic ideas about what we wanted to do in our lives. And somewhere along the way, life can beat us down and make us think that those goals that we had are not worth pursuing. And I feel like when I've talked with people about the goals that they used to have in their lives that they let go, that they haven't forgotten what those goals were. They look back and regret not pursuing them. And then you say, well, why don't you revisit those goals? Why don't you do something about it? If you have a job that you don't like, you certainly do have to continue, I guess, to tolerate it until you have found yourself another option. But maybe there's another option. Maybe you can get a certificate or go back to school, or you can take some kind of training or start a business. You know, who knows what kinds of possibilities there are out for you if you decide that you're going to saturate your mind, just like Dr. Freeman is going to talk about. Saturate your mind with the information that's out there about how people who have achieved the goals that you would like to achieve yourself have done it. Find every book that you can and read it. Explore in your own community those people who you would like to emulate. And take them out for a cup of coffee. If someone came up to me and said, "Hey, let me buy you a cup of coffee. I'd like to ask for your advice about a couple things," I would do that. Anyone want to take me out for a cup of coffee out there? So ask to take them out for a cup of coffee, have a conversation, and do a little homework before the conversation. Get out a piece of paper, write down the kinds of questions you want to ask. Even if those questions are, "This is what I want to accomplish," you seem to have come pretty close to accomplishing that. How'd you do it? And then just do what they did, even if it doesn't feel natural. If you know that how your life has been going so far is not up to snuff, it's not what you wished it could be, and someone else seems to have accomplished a goal that would make you feel proud, then forget what you've been doing, because what you've been doing hasn't been working. Go find those people who have accomplished goals that you would like to accomplish, and then copy what they did until you can start moving in your own direction independently, finding your own path. Start with a successful path that somebody else has carved out, and then you create your own individual take on that after you've become somewhat accomplished. Well, so when I talk to people about, "Why don't you revisit those goals?" what do you think they say? "It's too late." That's right. That's what they say. "That's too late for me. Here I am. I'm turning 50 in about 6 weeks. I'm 50. 50 years old." You remember that SNL skit? So I'm about to be 50. I've got some things that I still want to accomplish. Feel pretty good about what I've accomplished so far, but I have some other things that I'd like to do. I have a book coming out. I'm hoping that the book is a pathway to becoming a speaker. I want to get on the speaking circuit. I'd like to become a well-known writer. I'd like to become somebody that people came to for parenting advice. And I decided that I wanted to do that a couple years ago. And then I started making some phone calls. And I said, "This is something that I want to do. What do you think? How do I go about doing it?" And what they told me was, well, the best way to be able to get recognized is to have some kind of product. You have to create a product. And that can be a book or a game or some kind of thing that parents could buy or something that PR and marketing people can hang their hat on. And so I was like, okay. And then I sat down and tried to figure out how to write my book. My website was born as a method for breaking a 200-page book down into several 2- or 3-page articles. And here I am. I have a book coming out in May. I'll be talking more about that when that comes out. You can look for it in Amazon. On Amazon, it'll be called Parenting on Purpose. So I'm 50. I was 50 a couple years ago when I decided that I wanted to pursue this goal. I could have said, "It's too late. I'm 48 years old. I'm almost 50. Whatever. Sour grapes. I never wanted to write no stupid book anyway." But you know, listener, you know what you wish you could accomplish. And here's the message for you as I round out this first half. In 10 years, it's going to be 10 years later. in 10 years, it's going to be 10 years later than it is right now. So if you're 50, like me, and you feel like it's too late, imagine how you're going to feel when you're 60. Because, unless you die in some kind of accident or, you have some kind of physical problem that sends you into an early grave, most of you who are 50 are going to be 60. Most of you out there who are 30 are going to be 40 in 10 years. That's how the math works. As long as you're alive in 10 years, then 10 years is going to go by. Well, so try to think about your goal. Do you think that if you were to set your mind and your extra time, and don't tell me you don't have extra time, because everybody's got the same amount of time in their life, and if something is really important to you, you can figure out a way. You just have to prioritize and shuffle. You have to say, well, I'm spending this amount of time watching TV or doing this other kind of activity, and maybe that's going to have to be put on the back burner so I can spend some time pursuing this goal that I have. So think to yourself, this goal that you have, if you can identify it, if you can take yourself back to when you were in your 20s or maybe a little bit later, some goal that you have that you let go or that you pursued and then you quit on. If you spent a little bit of time every single day for the next 10 years, do you think that you would have a good shot of accomplishing that goal? Now, I don't know what your goal is, but I think most things, if you put your mind to it and you spend a little time every day over the course of 10 years, I think most things you could accomplish. I think you could learn to play the piano in 10 years if you worked on it every day. I think that you could learn about how to run a business or how to develop a successful website in 10 years if you spent every day for the next 10 years on it. I think that you can do it. Do you want to? Or do you want to continue to tolerate life as it currently is? One of the things that I want to do for the listeners out there is offer myself as a sounding board. I don't want people to necessarily look at me as an expert who's going to have answers for you. But if you've got something in your life that you need to talk about, and you need to talk about it in a confidential manner with someone who's not going to laugh at what you have in mind, reach out to me. I'm not even trying to make any money off you here. Reach out to me. info@drjohnrich.com. Let's have a conversation about where you might take your life if somebody just gave you a little kick in the ass. Thanks for listening. We're going to go to commercial. When we come back, we're going to have our interview with Dr. Freeman. Thanks for listening.
10 years ago, the energy market was deregulated. This opened the market to new suppliers. Ambit Energy is one of those suppliers. Go to ipmnation.ambitrabbit.com and see how you can not only get free energy by switching to Ambit, you can also earn travel reward points while lowering your utility bills. Learn more by going to ipmnation.ambitrabbit.com. Start saving today.
IPM Nation is proud to be sponsored by Uptown Auto Repair, located in Manchester, New Hampshire at 578 Mast Road. Phone number is 603-625-8026. Have you ever heard of a mechanic that guarantees their work? Well, now you have with Uptown Auto Repair, 603-625-8026.
IPMNation.com.
And we're back. Thanks for sticking around. I have on the line with me a friend of mine, Dr. Sharon Freeman. Say hello, Dr. Freeman.
Hello, everybody, and hi, John.
Yeah. So Dr. Freeman and I have known each other in a professional capacity for some time, and then we became Facebook friends. And actually, we've never met face-to-face, right?
That's hard to believe. I thought I did, but I think you're right.
Yeah, I don't think so. And we're living in a new age here where people can call themselves friends even though they've actually never spent like actual time in person with one another. But I do think of you in that way.
And I think of you in that way too.
Yeah. So you you just got back from Greece, is that right?
Yes, that's right. I was in Athens and Thessaloniki.
Wow. And was that a personal trip or was that a business trip?
No, I went for the U.S. State Department, and I often do diplomatic speaking tours for the State Department for decades, really. And this topic this time was Women's Entrepreneurship Month, and so I was speaking to women business owners.
Yeah, and that's kind of your area, right? You deal with a lot of grants and work with the government around entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship
and trade. So that's the trade aspect of my portfolio has been dominant for a long time.
Yeah.
And as we talk, I'll tell you why.
Okay. Yeah, well, so I want to know, like, if you can give me the arc of history behind your life, where did you come from and how did it seems like people who are on a mission have some kind of storyline where they can see that even though they didn't know at the time that they were heading in a certain direction, it all makes sense when you look back on it. Do you have a way of thinking about your life in that way?
Not in that way, but in
Okay.
a different way. So,
Okay.
yeah, my arc is a little bit different. I was born in Philadelphia a long time ago. We won't say how long, but it was a long time ago.
Go Eagles!
Go Eagles, right.
Yeah.
And so I went to graduate school, and I was recruited by Booz Allen in Hamilton, and people may not know this today, but that was the consulting firm that really started consulting. So it was a huge deal in the 70s to be selected to work there. So I just felt so wonderful about that. But I was also recruited by McKinsey. But McKinsey was in Ohio. I had gone to school at Carnegie Mellon in Pittsburgh, which I did not like, and Booz Allen was here in D.C., so I wanted to be here. I chose that company, and in choosing that company, they had guaranteed that they had all of these divisions, and it was very easy to move from one to the next. So
Okay.
I was hired in the economic consulting division, but I actually really wanted to work in international.
All right.
And so you couldn't just switch divisions like they misrepresented, because if you were good, you made money for a partner, and that partner would never let you go.
Okay, right.
Yeah, so they did put me on loan once to their international division in New York. I loved it. I did some fabulous assignments there, but then I had to go back to economic consulting. So my mission became how to permanently situate myself so that I could do international work.
Huh.
Again, the 70s, right? Not easy, and actually not easy at all for a very young African-American woman. There are virtually no precedents for this at the time. So this is sort of interesting, I think, for your audience, too.
Okay.
Way before the Internet, there used to be books that were printed called the Government Manual.
Can I just interrupt and say that I thought for a minute you were about to say, way before the Internet, there were these things called books.
Well, not quite, but close.
Yeah.
So, yeah, the Government Manual was the only reference that you could have that showed you how, the U.S. government was organized. And so you had to go through these 1,000-page books to say, okay, where are these agencies that do the international work?
Yeah.
And I found one, and it was very hard to get in there, but they were so impressed that I had worked with the prestigious Booz Allen that they said, okay, you're in.
Yeah.
And I tell you, I have been on a mission, as you say, ever since, and all of these years later, I've worked now in 100 countries, and I've seen, a lot about the development process from the stakeholders' perspectives of the government, international banks, private firms, and so I've learned a lot in these years.
So can you tell people who aren't familiar, what do you mean by development? What does it mean from the standpoint of government agencies? When you're talking about development, what does that entail?
Okay, so if we're talking about international development,
yes,
then that mission is to help countries to become stable economically and perhaps sometimes even politically. Mm-hmm. And so assistance is provided to help countries in need to develop their institutions, their policies, their infrastructure, and even to help build their enterprises. So these are the four main pillars of what's involved in development, and each one of those pillars have to be strengthened.
So let me ask a question, and I don't mean this to be confrontational, so don't take it that way, but is there an argument to be made that some of that work is surreptitiously just trying to create countries in our own image?
Well, I think that's not a point of argument. I think maybe that's a point in fact that we have promoted as a country democracy as the pathway for economic growth. And so we have very openly and expressly promoted the development of democratic institutions in foreign countries. That's actually no secret.
Uh-huh.
That's a part of it, but that part of it has to do with policies and institutions. There are other parts too, like the infrastructure, physical infrastructure, as well as, helping companies within these countries to thrive, which really also involves, what's required in terms of their need for institutional support. Such as in this country, we have the U.S. Small Business Administration that was created in 1953 that has been incredibly instrumental in helping small firms grow in this country.
Huh. Okay. So let's backtrack and talk about, where did the desire to travel so much come from? Did your parents do a lot of traveling, or where did you get the idea that that's what you wanted to do, was to go to lots of different countries?
Okay, thank you for asking that. And, I think today we think of television as being a source of many things bad and evil. But during my time, it was an enriching source for information and to expand one's horizons. So, I can definitely tell you which movies I saw, such as Paris Blues with Paul Newman, Joanne Woodward, and Diane Carroll, and Sidney Poitier that portrayed a kind of life, a really cool, hip life, centered around the music and underground alternative lifestyles in Paris, that I wanted to experience. And the funny thing is, as soon as movies came out on then VHS tape format, I sat down and thought about every movie that had made a formative impression in my mind, and I purchased every one of them, including Paris Blues.
You know what? That's actually I'm in my mind rehearsing the next question that I definitely wanted to make sure I asked you, and that's a great lead-in to it, actually. You didn't even know what my next question was going to be, but I'm thinking about all the people out there that have reached out to me over my tenure as a writer, and one of the things that comes up is they say that they have a goal, but they don't know how to go about achieving it. Maybe they want to start a business. There's a friend of mine who wants to start a combination arcade and a bar.
Oh, my.
But when you talk to them about, so what are you going to do? How are you going to do that? They're kind of at a loss as to how to go about doing it. And it seems like some of the things that you're saying, you figured out a way to really create a very concrete vision for what you wanted to achieve, and then it sounds like you're going out and just surrounding yourself with as much information as possible and hoping or expecting some kind of inspiration to come from gaining that knowledge. Is that accurate? Is that were you that intentional about trying to craft this career for yourself?
I would say that's absolutely correct, but not just my career, also my personal life. So again, from television and movies, there were certain things that, aspiring people did or learned to do, such as play polo, ski, water and snow. They went hunting. And so I had a very long list, and I achieved it all. I learned how to fly a plane. I had polo horses. I learned how to ski in every form. I climbed mountains. So all of this was my personal development plan, which I did succeed in.
Wow. That's pretty fascinating and impressive. So let's talk about this friend of mine who wants to start the bar. Like, what advice might you give that person about how to go about making that goal more of a reality? I'm not asking for free business advice as much as more like the thought process that goes behind trying to take something vague and turn it into something narrower and achievable.
Well, I actually wouldn't embark on that without talking to a lot of people who could actually help advise about it.
Yeah.
Because it's just an idea now, but through talking to people, they can tell you the pitfalls and the shortcuts, and basically it comes down from learning from other people. You don't really now have to rely on your own research exclusively, like I did, so many years ago. But that's the beauty of today as opposed to yesterday. There's so many resources available, and you don't even necessarily have to know the people. That's what actually Facebook and social media is about. You can just reach out there in the world and says, who's ever done this? And,
right.
Yeah. So, learning is the key. Don't do anything until you have a framework for understanding what you have to know before you dive into that.
Yeah, and I think you can apply that to any area of life. If you are thinking of becoming a parent, then maybe a little bit before you actually have your first child, you can go out and find some experts to give advice about how to do it effectively. Or you want to have a nice bank account, I'm sure that there are books that can be read. So that seems like pretty solid advice.
Yeah, I think that's what I would advise.
Yeah. All right, so I want to shift. We ended up talking about that longer than I was expecting, but you're such a fascinating person that I couldn't help myself.
Thank you, John.
Yeah, so I want to talk about the book that you have coming out. You have a book coming out, and tell us the title of that book.
It's called 33 Gems, Wisdom for Living Pieces of the Puzzle of Life. And
as I understand it, there are 33 contributors who have written about something from their life that they feel like a piece of advice that they would have for other people based upon their own wisdom.
Yes, and how they frame their 1,000-word essays, the beginning, is this I know for sure. And so people who have a lot of experience and wisdom, they had to really deeply mine that to decide which thing they wanted to settle on as the critical statement to share in this book, This I Know For Sure statement. So there are 33 essays, and these essays could be categorized into groupings, those who are talking about education, family life, career, business, religion, spirituality, sustainability, and other categories. And they include essays from people from every walk of life, gender-wise, race-wise, age and so forth. So I think it's a good cross-section of America. And the reason why there are 33 is because of the significance of that number biblically and mythologically, that it is imbued with, passion and humanistic qualities and mystery and whatever. And so I'm not, a philosopher, but it sounded cool to me.
Yeah.
So that's what we have, 33 essays.
Yeah. Now I'm looking at my notes in terms of some of the contributors, and I understand you have one actually very excellent, incredible contributor whose name is, let me see here, Dr. John Rich, I think it is. Yeah, right.
Dr. John Rich, yay!
Yeah, so I'm grateful to you for reaching out to me and giving me a chance to be one of the contributors to the book.
Well, I think your contribution is, is really fantastic and meaningful, and people will really take note of that. And I think yours and some of the others are just so honest and sharing so deeply from your lives. It's not just like a statement. By the way, I can say some people tried that, and I didn't accept it. They just wanted to opine about something, but they didn't want to connect those opinions to their lived experience, so I didn't include them.
Right.
So everything that people were saying, they sort of had to prove why they knew that for sure.
Yeah. I mean, I know that as I've developed as a writer, I've come to understand that I might have something that I want to try to persuade the reader to do in their life, but that the best way to do that is to use a lot of narrative and story to create some empathy along the way.
Right. And that's why your essay is so good.
Well, thank you. So let's talk about some of the other, you may not want to mention specific authors, but are there specific pieces of advice that resonate with you as a person particularly? There might be 33 essays, but probably not all of them are necessarily as inspiring as others. So which ones can you think of that connect with you as a human being in your own life journey?
I would say the articles I appreciate the most are not, for me, coming from that kind of orientation. The ones I appreciate are those that actually are clearly demonstrating advice that is strategic. And
Okay.
So in providing that advice, it has to be along a clear path. This is what I know for sure. This is why I know it, how I know it, what it means to know it, and therefore what it means for the audience to know it. So, I look at all of life as, a series of logical equations. So if this, then that.
Okay.
And once that, when it's presented in that way, then it's very compelling. So I'm not as much impressed by the height of the mountain someone had to climb, because there's a lot of that in this book, and those mountains were, Mount Everest high. But I'm only really taken with the story if they explained what the strategy was in terms of how much oxygen they needed, what kind of crew they needed, what kind of clothing and gear, how much, pre-work they did to do it and so forth, if they went into an oxygen chamber. Now, that's what I call, really solid, good advice. If you're just going to tell me that the mountain was high and you climbed it, then okay.
Good for you. Right.
Yeah.
Congratulations. Are you one of the contributors? Are you one of the 33 essays?
Yes, I am.
Okay. Are you willing to whet our appetites by telling us what thing you know for sure is, or is that giving away the farm, so to speak?
No, it's okay.
Okay.
My this I know for sure is about the importance of learning how you learn, because we all learn in different ways, and it takes us different amounts of time. But once you nail what your process is, then you can call it. And when I say call it, I'm a consultant, and I've had a consulting firm since 1985. And when I bid on work, I have to be able to do it, meaning I have to call it. If the job is 3 months, I have to produce it in 3 months, not 6 months and not a year.
Uh-huh.
And so, you have to know how you absorb and integrate and break down information. So I would say that's my greatest personal asset. I know exactly how long it will take me to go from ignorance to knowledge.
Great. And so how do you learn? What is your specific mode for learning something?
Oh, actually, I learn many types of things because I'm a good learner. So this could be in math, it could be in statistics, it could be in operations research, it could be in writing, it could be in any topic. And so that strategy is to figure out what are the main pillars of this house. In other words, you cannot know statistics unless you know these 5 or 6 things. Okay, so what are those 5 or 6 things? And then, depending on what they are, how complex are they, and what are the requirements to learn those things? And then the rest is just in the house. But you have to understand the foundation, and then you can figure it out from there.
Okay. And so what other types of what other modes of learning might some of the listeners discover about themselves if they looked into this that aren't necessarily that particular mode? Like, in other words, give us a sense of the different ways that people might be strongest in learning new information.
Asking other people.
Okay.
Just that simple.
Yeah.
In fact, I was interviewing a female Uber driver who had never done anything like that in her life. She hadn't been a taxi driver or anything, but she was at the point in life where she was ready to give that a shot. And when she explained how she went about that, she approached it as a business, understanding and identifying what were those pillars. So in other words, to be a good Uber driver, what are the things you need to know?
Okay.
So like at the airport, she said, you have to know what time the planes are coming. How do you know that? And you have to know where you can pull up and so forth and so on. And so, she had a system for figuring out how to be a good and successful Uber driver. And I just love that. In fact, that was not in the city of Washington, D.C. If it was, I would have included her in the book.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, well, great. So, I was just thinking about how I'm discovering even more and more as a result of the radio show that everybody's got insights and life lessons that are instructive.
Right.
There are a lot more people who have wisdom than we give people credit for.
Right. It's a matter of mining it. And once mined, to polish it like a rough diamond.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I heard somebody say that a lot of times the difference between the person who has the dream and never carries it out and the person who carries it out is just putting in the work, putting in the time to learn the information and being open-minded about improving, being humble enough to know that you're not there yet.
Yes, and I would add to that, not being afraid of ignorance. Because if you're overwhelmed by your ignorance, you can't get beyond it. And that's what I mean by calling it. You have to say, all right, this is the part I can possibly understand today.
Yeah.
Tomorrow's another day. But if you want to understand everything overnight, that's not going to happen. And if you're going to make yourself nervous because you don't know, then you'll never be able to climb that mountain.
Yeah. And I've shared this with you that in this, I guess it's a business or this venture that I'm entering with the writing and the radio stuff, that I feel like I'm good at covering content, but all this stuff about the marketing and getting people to come to your site and the Facebook likes and all that stuff, that is where I feel overwhelmed. And so I've been contemplating trying to find people to talk to who might have something more concrete. Like the way that I learn would be if somebody just said, like, every day I want you to do these 5 things. I can carry out a 5-thing list if I knew what it was, but that's just out of my area, I feel.
Me too, though. So if you find a person, send them to me.
Send them to you too, okay.
No, I'm certainly, not where I should be on that, and that's because the medium, being social media mostly, has to also be learned. Yeah. It's not just the information, but it's also being able to, really understand how to effectively use, all of the media. And I don't know that yet.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we grew up in a time, as you said earlier, where people used books. And, I'm just kidding again.
Yeah, no, that's right. And something interesting, the more Facebook friends I have, the less I'm actually understanding this realm. Uh-huh. Because there's just too many people and everybody's saying something. I actually don't know how to really effectively use things. Because if I try to, with thousands of followers, if I try to scroll down, it's endless.
Right. Yes.
It's just endless. And I don't even remember most of the people.
Yeah, well, so I had an earlier guest who talked about how the newest generation is almost seems like they're addicted to their phones and their social media. And one of the things that she pointed out was exactly what you're saying. And, if you're reading a book, there's a page, you can look ahead and say, okay, I got 8 more pages and then the chapter is over. And that's like a natural break if you would like to take it. But with Facebook and Twitter and all these other social media, it'll just keep refreshing and you'll never stop. You can scroll down and then there's more. And then you scroll down and then there's more.
I don't like that.
Yeah, you don't.
I don't like that because in my life, I always knew how to get to the end. Uh-huh. Now this is a situation that is endless. Yeah. And I cannot feel like I've won.
Right.
I want to win.
Yeah.
And win is getting to the end, and there's no end.
Right. Yeah. That's funny. And very characteristic of you to want that. So we're almost out of time, and I was thinking that, maybe you could share with us. You said that long ago you had this idea that you wanted to work in international development, and then you carried out the knowledge seeking in order to try to get there. So is there a goal that you have for yourself, either personally or professionally right now that you're working on?
Well, okay, thank you for asking that too. And I would say that in my life, although this will be my 25th book, I've never written a book that the general audience would be interested in. Uh-huh. My books have been on certain topics like how to export or how to, comply with government regulations, or how to take advantage of a certain program and so forth. So these are very specific audiences. So this is the first time in my life I will have ever produced a book that anybody can read. Yeah. So I just can't wait to see, if the public is interested in that, and then if they were interested, then what happens? I have no idea. I've never been in this realm before. Yeah. So I also have a chance to say to my friends, buy the book, go on Amazon, buy the book, and rate the book and all of that. Yeah. So I'm going to do that to see how all of that works, because if it does work, gosh, I would love to really just focus, more and more on that, because I know so many people, all of these 100 countries and systems, and I could endlessly produce material. But, I have to find the way to market this. And this is something that I have never done with a book property like this. So tell all your friends out there listening and everywhere else, when this book comes out, I will just be relentless in saying, please buy it. Actually, because this is being printed on by Amazon Publishing, I won't even have any of the books. That'll be a first, because I always printed and warehoused my own books. So we all have to buy it, even me.
Right, yeah. Well, yeah, so it's similar for me in that I've done a lot of academic publishing. I have about 50 publications in academic journals. And then along the way, I decided, okay, I've kind of had enough of writing academic work for other academics who already know all the academics that I'm academicing. That I would like to offer just everyday people who don't have PhDs access to what this research has to say so that people can have better lives and make better decisions. And so the book that I have coming out, which is, it looks like it's going to be early May, is the same thing. It's my first foray into a more popular book. And so what I would put out there is a couple things. First of all, if yours is successful and mine is successful, then perhaps we can collaborate on a next one. That might be interesting.
I like that. Okay.
And the second thing is, if there are any listeners out there that are experts on the use of social media, perhaps Dr. Freeman and I can pay you for a little bit of your time and learn from some of your expertise. So that would be great too. Absolutely,
because I definitely need it.
Yeah.
There you go.
Dr.
So we're
Freeman.
about to both embark on a major learning lesson. And let's wish us both success. And in fact, my success will be attributable to you and the 32 other essayists in the book. So.
Yeah. It's a great way to mine the collective wisdom of a whole bunch of people without having to solely rely on your own expertise. I like the concept.
Yeah, so again, we wish us luck, and I thank you very much for allowing me to be on your show today, and I look forward to keeping up with your other episodes.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Freeman. Thanks for your time and for sharing with us some of the things that I think there are some lessons in there that anybody can learn about the goals that they have for themselves. So I appreciate your time.
And I appreciate you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody. I'll talk to you next week.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Living in a city, when you're in it, watch the people walk by. And if you listen real close, you can hear them talk about their lives. And some hate it, some love it, some are felt, some are just tired. These are the people in the neighborhood, they just trying to make it out right. See, she never wanna be a new IPMNation.com